It's approximately 35 miles from Ternopil to Lenovci, rolling countryside. Much of it they grow sugar beets in. And shortly we arrive in Lenovci, and it's June 1st. The sign to the entrance to the town with Son Michael. And some of the things that we see right away was the car going by in front of it. And this is the old map drawn in 1969 by Lenovitz survivors. And this is a picture that my aunt brought with her from Lenovitz about 1930. And we're standing in the same spot that the picture was taken in and looking at this same street, which is now paved. And this is the house next door to my grandfather's house. The lower level is a shoemaker's. And it was a beer and wine tavern back in 1941. That's where my grandfather's house stood. Somewhere between 1964 and 1968, it was changed to this stucco 2-flat when it was originally a story-and-a-half frame house. Across the street is this Soviet-era apartment building where my grandfather's blacksmith shop once stood. This building is right around the corner, and there are some Lenovitz people living in the Seattle area. And one of them, she and her father used to work at that photo store. This is typical of what you see in many of the villages in the Western Ukraine. After meeting at the mayor's office, we went to the cemetery and discussed preserving it, along with the mayor in the middle, the architect on his right, and Vladimir, our missionary person, and the contractor standing foreground on the right.
Саме як з вами найліпше спілкуватися? Яким чином? Що вам? Телефон чи факс є у вас?
У мене є факс, в кабінеті 21118 міської ради.
Можна буде записати, чи ви можете візитку маєте бути на візитці? Хорошо. One second. І він ще хотів запитатись одну справу. Його просто цікаво, він от шукав де там батьків.
I was able to meet briefly with Gregory Basiuk, who's writing a history of Lenovci. He's been very helpful to us on our previous 2 visits there. We then returned to Ternopil for the evening and then back to Lenovci the next morning. We went and visited the marketplace, which began to be busy in the morning. And this was a place, when my father lived here, that he actually sold his horses and cattle that he had raised for market. We walked from the market to the old Jewish cemetery, which only has these brief remnants that you see here of stones. It is now several houses and a potato field. We encountered this woman who told us that when the Soviet era was here, that the Soviets had given this old Jewish cemetery to her mother. This cemetery probably dated back to the late 1600s, and underneath here are probably hundreds of burials. Then we continued walking back toward the marketplace, and we walked past a house last year where Catherine and I and Alex had interviewed a woman who still remembers her Yiddish and still speaks it quite well. That's her husband sitting on her left. drove by the restaurant that we had two of our lunches at. And we went past the area where there's a recreation area and an 8-unit hostel over here on the left. And then next to the river and lake where my father's brother Moishe drowned in 1908. Then we continue on up toward the old section of Lanovsy where the old Jewish Community Center was and was being used in 1941-42 for Gestapo headquarters. And now we're going to be looking at the area where the killing ghetto was built in 1941 and where about 1,800, 1,900 Jews were confined, about 600 to 700 of them from Lanovitz, and the rest of them mainly from Ketterberg and from Belazirka. All of the Ketterberg Jews were not killed here, but some of them were in Ketterberg. These two houses are remaining Jewish stone houses from before the war, and were much larger and in better shape, and the Soviets left them there. This is the monument built by Jews who returned to Lanovitz from Israel. And they built this monument in 1964-1965 with the permission of the village Soviet. This monument was built in 1999 by the local Christian missionary who created a forgiveness ceremony at that time. And the monument says underneath it in Ukrainian, "From the citizens of Lanovsy to the victims of the Nazis." Children play on the mass gravesite, and there's a woman across the street who sometimes shoos them away, at least the 3 times that we've been there. And I was really struck by this mother goose and her goslings, and I got a good feeling about it, that their presence on the mass gravesite was a good thing. I brought my bar mitzvah tallis because I wanted to say Kaddish for those who are buried here. The grave in the background is of Ita Nemanovich, who died in 1981 and was the last Jew in Lanovitz and chose to be buried in the mass gravesite. On our way out of Lanovsy, we passed the flour mill. A number of the Lanovsy descendants that I've communicated with on the internet and by phone mentioned their families mentioning the flour mill and their connection with the flour mill. And so Michael and I end our visit to Lanovsy, and the 3 of us, Alex and Michael and I, start on our way back to Lviv.